Lucky's actually from Wisconsin, as is Ted, our resident favorite typically. And Tasha is actually from Kentucky. So all the bears have come to us from different locations, both the males coming from Wisconsin, but they've all come from a different area. Now, bears are naturally found in all those areas, and it was really through no fault of their own, they're unable to be wild bears. So maybe someone tried to make them a pet, or they were separated from mom at a very young age. Whatever the case may be, now we care for them. This is their forever home, and they're going to live here until they pass. Now, you can see Lucky. He's eating from the scale there. And I did just have a question here, so I'm going to see what the question is.
Why do you have two microphones?
Well, the question was, why am I using two microphones? Well, the way our broadcast system works right now, we're having a little bit of issues with it, so I have to use two. So it broadcasts here for everybody at the center, and it goes out online because this is being broadcasted online. So those of you who are here today, thanks for coming. But let's say you want to maybe in a couple of days you want to see what the programs are doing or what the Bears are up to. You can log in online. It's completely free. You go to bear.org, that's our website, and you hit live cams, and you'll be able to see what the Bears are up to through our live cams. They're live 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So you can always see what the Bears are up to. And even some of the Bears like Ted has his own camera, so you can always see what Ted's doing. Now, if you can see what they're eating, you'll recognize a lot of those foods right away. I didn't get to see everything, but I did recognize some red grapes. Red grapes are one of our bears' absolute favorite foods here at the North American Bear Center. Now, we do have wild grapes that grow in Minnesota. We have river grape, frost grape, and a few other varieties. At least one of those does grow up in the Ely area and is a very important food source because of when it's available. Grapes, unlike other berries, grapes don't ripen until late in the year. So it's a very good food source for the fall time or late summer when they do start to ripen. We do have a few that grow along our fence line here at the Bear Center. I've been checking them, and there's no fruits yet, so we still got to wait a little while before those things are available to the wild bears. But they are a very important food source. Now, our bears here at the center, we get our grapes for them at the local grocery store. And you can get typically two kinds of grapes when you go to the grocery store. You can get green grapes or red grapes. Green grapes, believe it or not, are not as preferred as the red grapes. So the bears are very selective in their feeding. They very, very much so prefer the red grapes. That makes sense, though, because most people actually prefer the red grapes, typically because they're sweeter. So they taste a little better. Another food that they're getting is a variety of mixed nuts. So in those mixed nuts, we could have cashews, peanuts, walnuts, and all kinds of stuff, really. Basically, if you've baked with it before, it's probably in the Bears' diet here at the Bear Center. We get a lot of mixed nut packages, and that's typically what comes in them. So lots of cashews, lots of walnuts, even hazelnuts occasionally we get. Those ones are another wild food source that we have here in Ely, Minnesota. In fact, beaked hazel is one of the most common understory plants that we have. There's a ton of it in the enclosure, and actually a couple days ago we were doing some enclosure maintenance where we had to be in the main enclosure, and I did get the chance to check out some of those beaked hazelnuts in the enclosure, and they're looking really good, unlike some of the other plants this year. We did have a poor berry crop this year, at least the early blooming berries, so typically this time in northern Minnesota you could go out frolicking in the woods and get lots of berries. This year, though, not so much. We've gone through quite a drought this spring, contrary to the past 2 weeks where it seems to storm every other day. The initial rainfall that we got was very lacking, so that caused a lot of the berry bushes not to produce to their fullest extent. So for that reason, I can assume that this year we're going to have a very high amount of nuisance bear complaints compared to years past, because the years where they don't have plentiful wild food sources are the same years that they'll start visiting trash cans and bird feeders alike to get that extra nutrition that they would normally have via those berry bushes, but not so much this year. We do have lots of those scattered around the enclosure as well. One of the wild berries that grows very prevalently all around northern Minnesota is wild raspberry. We actually have several different species of wild raspberry, all which grow basically like weeds. They can grow in just about any type of soil, any type of sunlight condition, except for absolutely no sunlight. They're not very good at that. But just about any other kind of natural condition they can grow in. So they do grow quite heavily and around here, and I do usually pick them in my spare time, but this year, again, it's been really tough. Even the ones that are scattered in our garden and around the parking lot are just having a hard time producing. We also have wild blueberries. In fact, Ely has what's called the Blueberry Arts Festival every year. It's probably our single most busiest weekend of the year. This year, it's going to have a virtual aspect. They won't be doing the regular Blueberry Festival simply because of COVID and other issues this year, so they're not going to be doing it. But it is usually timed with the peak of the blueberry season. So right now, if you're staying at a resort here in Ely, or maybe at any different location, maybe you're camping or something like that, this would be a good time to be looking for those wild blueberries. Just keep in mind you may have to share your patch with a wild bear, because again, those wild food sources are lacking, but they are around. So if you go look for them, you may be able to find some. Now you can see Holly has just about cleaned her plate, and I mean that quite literally, as she has a very shiny bowl, and it's shining back up here, which means there's probably not a lot of food left in it. She did go ahead and eat everything, it looks like. She saved the vegetables for last. So I always like to joke and say our bears eat sometimes like little children. They're not huge veggie eaters in terms of the vegetables we give them, which usually is romaine and carrot. They will typically eat them last. But the romaine does replicate the wild vegetation they would be eating. And again, 90% of a wild black bear's diet is vegetation of some sort, whether that be actual leafy vegetation, berries, or nuts. It all comes from vegetation and or is vegetation. So the romaine acts like some leaf they would eat, or maybe some grasses, very similar nutritional content, and they will actually eat it all year round, but it's most preferred beginning of the year, in the springtime, when the other foods are also lacking. So the first stuff to grow up in the springtime up here is usually tree buds and grasses. So the fresh new shoots of the grass are highly sought after during that time of year, and even this time of year, when they're done eating their meals, they'll oftentimes forage on the clover or the fresh grasses you can see off to the right of the log pile over yonder. Now, Lucky looks like he's finished most of his, and he's cleaning up some of the scattered spread, is what we call it, when we throw food out in a large array out here. We call it a spread for the bears. So we had a spread down there before we gave them their dinner, so it looks like Lucky's cleaning up that. The spreads almost always consist of mixed nuts and some dried fruits. The dried fruits most commonly being cranberry. But occasionally we'll get apricots and other things as well. It really depends on what the supplier has available for us when it comes time to order. And again, here, due to COVID, things were a little different. We couldn't order our typical food sources, or maybe from the same people, so we did have to do a little bit of different ordering this year, but the bears seem to be happy and liking the foods as well. Now you'll notice Holly's got a little brown patch on her head, and Lucky's got a brown spot patch all the way down his back. That's because Holly has already finished shedding her winter coat. What's left of it is that brown patch on her head, and Lucky is just starting, so he has most of his coat to shed. The brown stuff you can see on him is just what he shed first. So once the hair starts to shed, it dies. It gets bleached by the sun while it kind of slowly hangs on to their backs and the rest of them. And when it gets bleached, it turns that brown color. And so that's how you know which stuff's dead and ready to fall off. So Lucky's starting to get rid of that stuff along his back there. And actually, mid-July, it's not unusual for this to be the time when the bears do lose their winter coats, unless you're Ted. Ted usually doesn't lose his till mid-August. So Ted's a little different, being our only captive-born and captive-raised bear. These two bears were wild at one point, so they do retain their wild instincts and lots of their wild schedule. So Lucky, it is not abnormal for him to start losing his coat, and even the wild bears here in Minnesota are probably starting to lose their winter coat right now. They only lose it for about a month or two before it starts to go back, as in September or maybe even late August, they'll start to get the new fresh coat back in order to be prepared for hibernation when that comes. Typically, in this area, mid-September to mid-October is when bears start to hibernate in the wild in northern Minnesota, but it's variable depending on if you're a female with cubs, a female who's going to give birth to cubs, or you're just a wild male. The wild males will typically go down latest, with the females with cubs or giving birth to cubs going down sooner. Now you can see both the bears are still foraging for a little more food. Lucky's like, you know what, I had enough of all these people. There's no more food. He's going to take off. And that's one of the biggest differences between Ted and the rest of the bears. Ted, being the captive-born and captive-raised bear that he is, he loves people. He only knows people. He's never met his mom bear, so he's very fond of people. The rest of these bears, once we don't have food for them, they don't really want to hang around. They see us as food givers, which is great, but it's not like they love us or anything like that. I'm sure they're grateful for the food they get and all the people that come to visit them, but at least in the case of most of the staff, it's we bring the food. And so when the food's gone, they'll look around for a little bit more, but typically as a wild bear, they're not fond of people. They don't like to be around people, so they act natural in that way that when the food's gone, they typically disperse. I'm just going to see if anybody on the observation deck has any questions they'd like to ask or get answered while we're here, so let me pause for a brief moment. Anybody have any questions they'd like to ask at all? Why does Holly have a dent in her ear? Holly came to us as a rescue. She was caught and separated from her mother in a wildfire, and she had some ear tags that got very, very infected by the time she got here. Under the vet's instruction, we had to actually surgically cut those out instead of just removing them because they were so infected. So that's why she has that nick. And her other ear, the one that's not nicked, actually has a large hole in it, almost like a gauge. My ears are gauged, so we have that in common. But one day this year, actually, we found a large stick through it. So we do know that she does have a full-size hole in her other ear, and the other one's just a nick. So the one was much worse than the other. The one we were able to remove, and it's just a hole. The other one we did have to cut out, and that was at a very young age for her. And she wasn't too happy about it. I'm sure now it's not a big deal. It doesn't really affect her day-to-day. I'm sure the other bears can hear a little better than her, but I don't think it affects her too much. But that was a great question. Thank you. Do they get a regular physical checkup? They do, once in the spring and once in the fall. We collect... yeah. So we typically collect a scat sample at both of those times and send them into the local vet. And then also, if there's anything pressing with their coat or other issues, we'll bring the vet in. And our head bear keeper, Sharon, is actually able to manipulate how they're standing or sitting on the fence so the vet can check out the problem area. So we'll hold let's say it's maybe on the inner thigh. We get the bear to stand up and have its head way up high so the vet can inspect that lower thigh area and be away from the mouth because we don't want her to have to do that if she doesn't have to. And then if something's super needed, let's say, like for example, we neutered Lucky in the past, then we'll have that operation done here at the center so they don't have to leave.
If you do any operation, like even neutering, you need to put them out, right?
Yes, if we do any operation on the bears, they do have to go under for that, specifically for the safety of both the bear and the person. If it's not like a human where if they were under some pain, you could tell them it's going to be done soon, just relax. They're a bear, they don't understand that, so we do need to put them completely under in order to do those surgeries.
And throughout the day, how many times they are fed?
How many times are they fed throughout the day? Well, they do get 2 meals from us. They get a breakfast and they get a dinner, and then yeah, it's very similar, with the exception of maybe a couple different options. So they get a fresh egg in the morning, whole, not cooked, uncracked. They'll crack it themselves and eat that. And then they do get, they eat it raw. And then they get a couple servings of fruit and veggies in the same mixed nut as well. And then on the tours, on the behind-the-scenes tours, we do feed them treats in the form of typically shelled peanut or in the shell peanuts. So it's hard to say what each bear eats because it really depends on who's getting the tour, and then also they're also able to get all the food they want naturally as well. So there is quite a lot of options for them. No problem. All righty. Does anyone have any questions over here at all? Awesome. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. We do have some more behind-the-scenes tours to get to, so for those of you folks who are here and haven't been on the behind-the-scenes, we're going to try to get those in here before we do close at 4. So I'm going to wrap up the tour here. I'm sure everyone's bored of me talking. So I just want to go ahead and give a shout-out to those of you online who are tuning in and watching. We really appreciate that. And all of you, those of you here, we really appreciate you paying your admission price to be here. Again, the Bear Center is a non-profit organization, so we use all the money to spend on the bears and whatnot through admission price and gift shop sales. So we really appreciate y'all coming in. That's again all we get for taking care of the bears. And I know for a fact Ted, Lucky, Holly, and Tasha all really appreciate y'all coming in here because if you didn't, they would not have food to eat. So again, we appreciate that. If you want to help us out, you like what you saw here, you like what we're doing, you don't need to necessarily donate. There's plenty of ways you can help out, but one of the biggest and best ways to help would be to give us a review. We're on TripAdvisor, we're on Facebook, we're on Google, we're on all the major places. If you really liked what you heard or saw or did today here at the Bear Center, we would really appreciate a review. And if you can't do that, maybe just tell your friends about us. Honestly, word of mouth is some of the best way to advertise. So if you did like your experience today, tell your friends about us. Tell them to come up here. Tell them to come up and enjoy Evie. We would very deeply and greatly appreciate that. So, again, thank you all for tuning in. Our next broadcast will be tomorrow at 11 o'clock, and I hope to see you there. Thank you.